how do you see the expansion of the I-270 corridor up to Germantown?
I'm not a big roads guy. I'll be honest. Roads typically result in more traffic congestion. Because of this, this thing called induced demand. Essentially, when you build more roads, more people drive. There are, of course, ways to mitigate that, by including transit on the roads, for example. And I know that transit is supposed to be a component of the 270 495 plan. And there's also a portion of that is going to dedicate revenues from those tolls to transportation improvements along 270 and potentially 495. Ultimately, the county does play a role in that project, but it's a state project. And if the county, if the state decides to move forward with it, I think my role as a council member would be to push for and champion first that the project is mitigating the stormwater impacts and environmental impacts from that project, from adding the actual lanes. And then secondly, that, no cultural and historical resources are impacted. There's cemeteries and parkland along that corridor that would be impacted. And so either relocating those places or getting money from the state to build more parks and things other ways. But in terms of what we could do about the traffic itself, the council actually just passed yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, the I-270 corridor forward plan, which essentially calls for a few things. The first is it calls for long-term improvements to MARC, to commuter rail along the Brunswick line, to allow two-way commuter rail, trains on the MARC line. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is a red line extension from, I guess it'd be Shady Grove to Germantown. And then in the short term, it calls for using some of that toll revenue to fund what's called the Corridor Cities Transitway, which is essentially a bus rapid transit system that connects the Up County to the Wheaton Mid-County area. So, again, I think the best way that we can get people out of their cars and reduce traffic congestion is to make it safer and easier and more convenient for them to use other modes of transportation, whether it's walking, biking, or using transit. And so I think if we make some of these commitments and improvements, it'll make it easier for folks. But again, that's a long-term project, and we'll see. There's a gubernatorial election this year, so we'll see who wins that race and what that the next governor decides to do with that project. But ultimately, I see my role on the council as a champion for mitigating the impacts of that project, and then finding other ways to lessen the impacts. Because the reality is that if there are toll lanes, we've seen in Virginia, some of those tolls have gone up, really, really high, where, the average person, may not be able to afford to use those toll lanes, whereas they may be able to afford to use a bus or some other mode of transportation that the county provides.